An incredibly long time.
It's been a while.
I feel like he won the season 2 finals on winner's side. I'm pretty sure. He won the Contenders Cup on winners. What the is that? What?
I love it.
It was just Halloween, you know, a little while ago. You know, maybe Hacterox forgot to throw out his costume. He's ready to go today.
He looks completely serious, like
Yeah,
poker-faced kind of determination here. I love that more than anything.
absolutely. But yeah, it's been a long time since we've seen JaZe lose. So today might be the day. Maybe Hacterox has it. I think his decks are very well positioned against JaZe, but of course we've seen JaZe just kind of push through everything.
All right. Now this. Oh, sorry, I was going to say is that this is a matchup that I've actually seen teams between you and I had to cast a lot before. This is actually a matchup I remember a lot from Rage tournaments of Mid Shadow versus Control Blood. Extremely grindy matchup that just really comes down to threat after answer after answer. But I think there are a couple new tools here, things like Andre Alphys that kind of mix it up. Now, how do you feel about the position of Shadow in this particular matchup, since Control Blood can be fairly easy to understand?
Right. So Control Blood is really just trying to outlast Shadow, and realistically, it just comes down to, can JaZe fill up a strong enough board backed up by an Ektar to get enough damage through to then finish off with whatever he has left over. I think that Mid Shadow is a lot more poorly positioned against Control Blood than it ever has been, because it can't set that up as well as it used to, and it doesn't have a lot of early game damage anymore. But it does have a lot more card advantage now, especially when you play Andre Alphys. So it could just be about maybe Mid Shadow turning into the control deck that's trying to outlast Control Blood. And it's just whoever can do it better with managing their resources.
Mm-hmm. I think another really big part of it is that we see this more in players in our region than players in Japan, but whereas players in Japan usually just relied on the neutral package for win conditions and were fine with just, if I ever get to resolve a Bahamut, I probably win off of it otherwise.
Right.
We see a lot more of a focus on in-class win conditions from regions like EU and NA, where even a deck like this, I think if I looked at it correctly, has 2 Spawns of the Abyss, wants to even finish off with Azazel, sometimes in conjunction with that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that changes the dynamic of the matchup a bit to where Hacterox isn't only looking to grind, but if he can just resolve his win conditions versus JaZe, that's really difficult for Shadow to deal with.
JaZe did, however, account for this, you know, being him, is playing 3 Necro Assassins on top of his already, you know, consistent ways to deal with things like Spawn of the Abyss. So he does have answers to the end game that Hacterox did put together. I don't know how much of a part that will actually play over time, but JaZe, especially knowing how to play Control Blood, probably knows exactly what he needs to do to beat it. So very specifically, I think he knows how to pilot against this matchup. I just don't know if Shadow has all the tools it needs, that's all.
Right. And here, as you said, the use of the Necro Assassin allows JaZe to maneuver right around cards like Sabrura and deny them value, but value alone is not what wins this matchup.
Right. It's about smart play, positioning every single turn correctly. I'd actually like to hark back to the game yesterday that we saw Akamaru Red play with his Shadow deck and how he maneuvered against Dirt Rune. A lot of times it's not about just expending what you have, going all in, or, you know, doing anything crazy. Sometimes it's about knowing exactly what your opponents can do and playing around them, and then eking out small bits of advantage turn after turn that eventually just net you a win.
We may see a similar situation to that, actually. I think yesterday we saw a game where playing Dirt Rune versus Shadow, he actually had to manage his life versus a Tyrant. And similarly, JaZe's not playing a type of Shadow that gets Shadows quickly, but he does have a single copy of Tyrant to try to get that reach. We may find a similar situation where that's one of the biggest threats you can hold versus Blood, especially since, unlike Rune, Blood likes to be around the range where Tyrant would end up being a lethal hit.
Right, and realistically, that might be JaZe's game plan. It might just be, you know what, it doesn't really matter. I just need to make sure that my opponent is at 15 or less and have an EVA point, or 13 or less. However, if Hacterox, you know, decides that is what JaZe's win condition, he can always plop down a Mask of Black Death at the appropriate time, or gain enough health before it actually matters. So it's really just an ebb and flow type of game.
Mm-hmm. Now I'm seeing a lot of these players, we saw this yesterday too, they're really only running 2 Masks of the Black Death. I used to see, or I'm used to seeing Control Blood usually opt for 3 because they just want protection from that kind of thing. But I think that's what leads us to a matchup like this, where the most important card to watch is probably going to be the Mask of the Black Death in Hacterox's hand, and the next one, if he can find it throughout this game.
Right. I actually talked about that yesterday too, and we've been talking about Mask of Black Death pretty much every single week since Control Blood came back into the meta. Mask of Black Death is basically one of the best options for Control Blood, period. And I still find it funny that some players are opting to play less than 3 in their deck, just because of how versatile it is and how many different things it can answer.
Mm-hmm. There's really not many cards like this, actually, that can negate so much damage at once. I think Blood is in a really unique position in creating a control archetype, just because it has a card like this. The next closest equivalent I can even conjure off the top of my head is like Haven has some things like Aegina and Nawis, which can limit damage over short periods of time, but they're much easier to navigate around than Mask is.
Right. Well, Mask can essentially sit around for, 4 or 5 turns, depending, and just kind of just be there. Whereas, Nawis, Noise, Nisha, however you want to say her name, is a 1-turn effect, right? So a lot easier, like you said, to play her.
Now that you mentioned that, I'm not sure if I pronounced that correctly. It's like Nisha or something.
I think it's Nisha. We here on the show like to call her Noise. At least Envy brought that to light. So really just depends on your flavor.
Right. I thought it was a male too, due to the Grand Blue art. Very handsome young man, I thought. But I could be wrong.
But we actually see one interesting thing to note. JaZe's already used 2 of his Necro Assassins. So maybe the Spawn of the Abyss can actually get a lot of work done. However, JaZe does have a Lurchin Corpse combo in his hand, so that's still available.
Mm-hmm. I think Shadow gets a lot of leeway in this matchup due to that. It's really interesting that I think when trying to navigate this matchup, I think someone who's not really familiar with it might have a really tough decision-making scheme of when can I use things like Lurchin Corpse and Necro Assassin? At what point am I forced to have one in hand, or how long throughout the game do I still need to hold on to them? And I think we've seen these Necro Assassins used at pretty good times that just gives JaZe enough board pressure to where he's not having to bend over backwards to deal with every follower that Hacterox plays with extreme value like Righteous Devil or Sabrur.
I also find it interesting that JaZe decided to let this Righteous Devil just kind of go through. He could have evolved one of the zombies and used a zombie party to kill it, but I think he favors keeping the card advantage that zombie party can do for next turn, essentially with this Righteous Devil possibly trading, and then zombie party finishing it off and filling the board up again. So I really like that JaZe's taking this super tempered approach. He's kept his Lurchin Corpse option even after using the Necro Assassins. And yeah, I honestly don't know how this match is going to eke out. It could literally just be by cards in deck. We've seen that happen several times with JaZe playing. So, and that's not to say it's a bad thing. That just means that both players know exactly what they need to do in the matchup, and neither person can gain an edge, and the person who drew a couple extra cards ends up losing the game.
We've seen players mostly go for value and looking for more cards from the deck, even now, committing Belphegor more than anything, and just not using these evolution points, trying to get as far ahead on the board as possible. I think this turn is actually the first time this game where Hacterox has had such an advantageous board state, and it's only still just by a little.
Yep, and I really like the Azazel now. The Azazel will threaten lethal pretty much every single turn now, so JaZe has to be careful. He knows it's a possibility, being open deckless, and then, especially after the spawn can come down and kill with Azazel, the board right now can kill with Azazel. So JaZe's going to have to navigate here. This is now on Hacterox to win.
I'm actually sweating a little bit because both players are in such a tight situation. He recognizes JaZe has 1 copy of Tyrant that could come out at any point, similar to Azazel. Any amount of damage he lets through that's too much past a turn where he could play Mask of the Black Death is going to just threaten ending the game. But at the same time, as long as he has a board state like this, it's not really in JaZe's favor to try to last any longer than Spawn of the Abyss resolving, because he can't rely on a Lurchin Corpse alone to hit it through all of this.
Right. Absolutely. So Hacterox, I feel like playing perfectly, like just filling the board up, being consistent with what he's doing. He's trading and building the board up, and now that he has the option to just straight up win the game with Azazel, I feel like, yeah, that's exactly what you want to be doing.
That zombie party just now raises JaZe to 18 shadows, and if Hacterox clears it, that's going to be it for Tyrant. Just a little bit more face damage, and he has that with an evolution point. That leads me to the question of, do you think Hacterox is pressured to use Mask of the Black Death now, this following turn, or perhaps just a few turns after that?
Well, this attack would be very telling to me. So my opponent forcefully evoed and went face for 3 damage when he hasn't done anything of the sort lately. So this would say to me, okay, definitely Tyrant is now active. It's the card that I have to worry about, must deal with. If Hacterox doesn't appropriately define what just happened, then he will just straight up lose to it. So I'm hoping he picks up on the signal here.
There's a lot that actually goes into navigating these few turns, because Azazel, assuming it's not being played on the exact same turn where Hacterox just simply has lethal, it can't really be used to set up some kind of a use of spawn later. Sort of means that he needs to make sure he ends the game as soon as he resolves the Abyss, and he just now commits to it.
Yep, and unfortunately he did it in an unfavorable board spot, so JaZe can actually just play around this mask while also dealing with the spawn. So I think now, with the extension of spawn, and I don't think it was a bad play from Hacterox, I probably would have opted for the Belphegor and just more sustain until I built the board back up, but it's really hard to do against Shadow, right? So it's really hard to navigate that entire game plan. But now JaZe can kind of comfortably clear the board, get in some chip damage, try to get that mask down, and kind of just be comfortable to win, because now Bahamut's turned off, Azazel's turned off, and there's not really much else Hacterox can do from this point.
Right. Perhaps he's just making the call that he's played out most of the followers that he's going to be using, or at least most of the low cost. Can I call 4 to 5 cost followers low cost? Anything that he can play alongside other cards in his deck. He's mostly started to drain out of his resources, already 24 cards in. Perhaps he's thinking, if I go for the Belphegor and try to clear, then I'm not really guaranteed to draw enough to make my board position any better than it would be if I just went for the Abyss now and just tried to commit to winning.
Right, and I don't mind this line. This is basically saying I've already seen 2 Necro Assassins. I'm not really worried about the Lurching Corpse thing.
Give it to me.
So this is, as you mentioned before, just a perfect response to that.
Yep, and I think we'll actually see the Evo here. Oh no, not pre-combat. So electing to let all of the damage slide here. If he would have Evo'd before the mask was popped, he could have actually dealt 4 damage this turn. Decided not to, though.
I think it's the difference of he wants to save the Evo so he can have maximum damage come out of hand with the Tyrant. The difference just being that this, well, whereas the other play that you mentioned might be better in the case that Hacterox had another mask or something, in this case, all he's risking is healing, which Hacterox didn't actually elect
the other setup would have actually provided a lethal setup this turn. So right now Hacterox could be at 11, and JaZe could have just plopped down a Deathly Tyrant to win. However, without being 20 shadows, it doesn't really matter that much for this turn, and I guess it might not really matter in the long run. It just gives Hacterox more time to heal.
I think he just slams it down and wins.
Oh,
I
never
forgot
mind.
for a second
Never
that Tyrant
mind.
cost it.
That's right. That's right. You can actually just build that last shadow there.
Like, you would
So
imagine that
lethal setup
15
is
damage
bad.
faces the whole turn, but like I constantly miscalculate this when playing against this deck, because I just forget that they can get the shadows that turn anyway.
So JaZe, regardless of the Evo last turn or not, was able to get to 20 shadows and pump out the last bit of damage he was going to need anyway. So regardless, Evo, no Evo, same exact play, perfectly executed by JaZe. Just the simple fact that he had the answer, you know what I mean, to the spawn when he needed it. He dealt with the board states every single turn going into it. Really just played that very well. Hacterox, I can't say really played it wrong either. I mean, that both players just on point that game. JaZe just slightly edging him out before the end of the game there.
Yeah, with 2 lists that have such explosive win conditions against each other, it can be really difficult to figure out just at what point you can commit what resources, how much you have to heal. I think one of the most impressive things was JaZe knowing when he could use Necro Assassins to just keep on the board and pressure Hacterox enough to where he could get him hovering around that range where Tyrant would be lethal.
Right. And Tyrant doing a very, very funny impression of Roach against Control Blood. It's just one of those big Storm followers that can just OTK you out of nowhere, and I think that's why JaZe brought it. You know, it's one of those things that if you are playing a grindy matchup, you can still win a game.
And coming off the back of that, we are now witnessing what is widely referred to as the pillow matchup. I think I have seen this many times in my days, and it has never sped up. This is the equivalent of like really just Paicho in Shadowverse. It is a game of nothing but patience and holding resources.
Yes.
At the moment, really, I think the early game always just comes down to development. We're just going to really be seeing them drawing cards and biting against each other's early game followers and resources that are usually used to bite out aggro with very little impact for a while.
This is kind of like the last matchup. The main differences here are that I think Blood has a slight edge because of Emeraldas being able to just clear out Bahamut's easily. However, Hacterox is not playing the form factor Control Blood list with Bahamut's himself, right? He's not playing like the super late game, like you said, neutral package that we would see from Japan type of list. He's got his own end game, and I think that makes him a little weaker versus Dragon. So I think these decks are very evenly matched yet again. I think maybe Dragon has a slight edge now because of the lack of endgame from Hacterox, but Hacterox has a combo endgame, so if he is able to pull that off, he might be able to just sneak a win out.
Now, there's something interesting that I know that you have a really, really wide history with card games. With that being said, in Shadowverse, I haven't really thought about things in these terms much before, but there's like articles and such that refer to mirror matches as still relegating archetypes to each player, like that being the beatdown versus the control.
Sure.
I haven't really thought too much often about how in Shadowverse this can happen in matchups like this that otherwise just seem decided by cards like Bahamut and the like. When Hacterox put down the Sabura on turn 5, just to get something on the board, do you think that that's kind of like Hacterox is assigning to himself the role of the beatdown where he wants to have board pressure over JaZe?
Well, I think it manifests itself differently in this game. So being the beatdown in this game doesn't really mean as much as it would in other card games. Basically in this game it's just reactive or proactive, which is similar, but not quite the same. Beatdown meaning, you know, I am going to be the aggressive player. I am going to be the one that sets the tone of the game. Whereas just proactive versus reactive means, you know, in this game specifically, you have to use your evolution orbs, right? Or you're trying to force your opponent to use a resource as opposed to just being the person who's going to win faster or the person who is, you know, presenting lethal faster or anything like that. It's just about resource manipulation a lot more in this game. So it's just interesting. Making a play like Sabura, that does give you, you know, a little insight to what Hacterox is thinking. He doesn't think he needs to save that for late game Bahamuts or anything like that. So maybe he is trying to pressure those Evo points. Maybe he is trying to just pressure more resources out of the hand before it gets to the late game. But as you can see, beatdown, that's not really happening, right?
I guess it's also very difficult with the amount of value you can stuff into a deck in Shadowverse to actually really resolve that much damage. When you have two classes like this, Blood and Dragon, perhaps just the two classes that have the most access to healing just under Haven.
Plus, in a game like Shadowverse, cards cost more in decks like this, right? You don't get to play a lot of spells or followers all at the same time. It's just, you know, Haymaker after Haymaker after Haymaker, as opposed to being able to do multiple things or, you know, responding to things or anything like that. It's just very straightforward. I've got a threat, you've got a threat. So you've got to make the best use out of your turns.
Yeah, we're seeing exactly that happen here. Had a Spawn of the Abyss, wanted to just try to throw that into a lethal setup there, but didn't work out because JaZe just easily responded with a Bahamut that Hacterox probably saw coming.
Yeah.
Now here
And
we
I don't
see,
mind that. I don't mind that at all. It's kind of like the whole polyphonic roar thing or the first Bahamut thing. If I've got it and you don't, I win the game. But, you know, in the case that JaZe does have it, yeah, you got to keep playing.
Here we see what I like to call the Take-Two special. I think this is where Mr. Full Moon, like, this is it. This is the situation where Mr. Full Moon is good. I mean, a lot of people probably said that he was one of the only answers that now exists to Aegis or other things like that. But for Take-Two players, the reason why you snap pick him half the time, or why experienced players do, is just because if your opponent Bahamut's, it's a 113. That's it.
Yeah, 113 is actually still pretty decent value. It's not amazing, but it's decent value.
It clears tokens.
Yes, yes, it does.
It could clear bats if you
And
have any of those in
it's hard to deal with if you think about it. Like that 113 might not be very menacing, but like 10 turns later after it's attacked you 10 times, you're just like, how do I actually get rid of this thing?
I think that's what makes Mr. Full Moon actually a really unique card. There's not really many cards in Shadowverse that deal with things without really dealing with them. We have in Forestcraft a mechanic that prevents followers from attacking, and I think none of which have really seen tournament play or competitive play in a really long time. So Mr. Full Moon
I'm
really...
completely wrong. I missed this. Bahamut is in play for Hacterox. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So never mind. Never mind.
It's other neutral cards like I guess Israfil or a Sahagwil package that I'm very used to seeing Japanese players using. But Bahamut just seems like a mainstay of control too much for it to be a difference at all.
Sure. So I kind of really like Hacterox's position here. It really is just going to come down to, can he hold off longer than JaZe can with his resources? I don't know if I like that Sabrewer play, though. I think that was simply for reacting to what we were talking about. How am I actually going to kill this thing? I need to do it. And he already feels like he can answer an opposing Bahamut, but he kind of gave away one. Like, if a Bahamut war started right now, right? And JaZe was left with the last one, that Sabrewer wouldn't be there to back up Hacterox to save him. So,
Hacterox is really limited. I think that's, outside of his own Bahamut, that's his only real way of dealing with a Bahamut. Even Temptress Vampire, if not in conjunction with something like Diabolic Drain, even just playing her and evolving her into it is still not 13.
Right. It's just interesting to see the Sabrewer come down like that, just to empty off something that Mr. Full Moon already technically dealt with. So, JaZe kind of getting up in card advantage here, especially with cards like Star Phoenix, just trying to eke out advantage every turn that he can. I really like it again.
Yeah, I really love that use of Star Phoenix, actually. Even if you just glance at his hand, still has another Dragon Oracle, which, cards like Dragon Oracle, or cards that are early game spells, tend to try to refund themselves to be useful to Dragon later with the card draw, but Star Phoenix adds a whole nother element to that. If you can think of it as summoning a 2/2 every single time you play a spell, I think that might make it one of the most useful or most pivotal cards that JaZe ends up playing in a matchup like this.
He's one of the first players that we've seen in competitive play actually bring the Star Phoenix to the Ramp Dragon package. I think it's very useful. I think you can eke out a lot of advantage with it. Even if you wanted to play something like Staircase beside it, you know what I mean? Just extra value there. You don't have to, of course. But just another value card, right? And Dragon is a value deck. So making sure that you have options across the board to deal with most things is what you want in a control deck. So
the Star Phoenix, alongside the remainder of Bahamut, can deal with a threat like Temptress Vampire here without committing more than just a single Dragon Oracle, and I think that I personally had not actually seen much out of this card, but I think even just entertaining possibilities like that shows off how useful it can be.
And I think this is actually an attempt from JaZe to force a Bahamut so that he can Bahamut the Bahamut in response. And he's got 2 Scythers to back it up anyway, so he's not worried about the Bahamut war at this point.
He raises himself back out of the, or climbs slowly back out of the life disadvantage Hacterox put on him with Temptress Vampire. But Hacterox is just resilient on not showing this Bahamut until he absolutely has to.
And that Bahamut's still in play, I might add. Still in play.
It's gotten reduced all the way down to a Bladed Hedgehog without an effect.
Right.
I think it's done a total of like 2 to 3 face damage. Like, I still don't have an opinion of Mr. Full Moon. I think this Bahamut has been dealt with, but it's still been useful enough to the point where there are some other removal options that may have dealt with it just fine.
To be quite honest, I think Mr. Full Moon is a great one-of in Control Blood, just in case somebody brings an Aegis against you, because you literally can't beat that card, or a Beauty and the Beast, you know what I mean? So there are uses for it, it's just not good in most matchups.
Actually holds off on the hit from the Bahamut there.
He's like, nah.
It's just too much energy after all the attacks he's already thrown out with it.
That's right. To be fair, we got to see a lot of extra laser beams this game, and I'm always a fan of Bahamut laser beams.
You know, Bahamut, when that card first got released, first of all, its impression was its summon animation, which is, like, it takes up the entire screen. It's like the only card that still does that. But the attack animation is probably like just the most mind-blowing in the game, aside from like Deepwood Anomaly.
I love it. I love it every time. So, in case you guys are wondering why he's not playing the Baphomets from hand just for extra value here, it's because of the card deck size. So if you look at Hacterox, he's one card above JaZe in turn order, and he's trying to keep it that way, so that in case the game does go long, he won't lose to that aspect. And that might actually be the same reason why we see JaZe hold the Oracle and or the Fervor to see if Hacterox will ever manipulate that.
Mm-hmm. This is the exact epitome of when Japanese chats for tournaments or streamers otherwise just start spamming Pokerverse, because neither player is in a position where they can reveal much of their hand, even though both players already have a lot of guesses on what the other player is holding.
Ooh, okay, decides to opt for the Bahamut here. Not bad, because he has the Righteous Devil to answer a follow-up Bahamut. However, Scythers in the hand from JaZe just gives him more options.
You mentioned before that JaZe was possibly holding a lot of card draw in order to stay ahead, and if we consider that this might be a game where neither of them actually reach 0 defense, then you can actually consider the remaining deck size as a health total. And he runs out a little bit by going for the Dragon Summoner here, or at least he gives Hacterox a chance to draw one card without giving up that advantage.
Right, and that's exactly what Hacterox leads with. Rightfully so. And I think JaZe has just understood that Hacterox is playing that game, so JaZe needs to speed up a little bit. I think his card draw is now, all right, I need to start using it so that I can start developing advantage to win this game. Otherwise, I'm just going to straight lose the long game.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, and that's what we're seeing.
Be such a difficult time in the game to make such a decision, though. Control Blood has had the card advantage for a while. You're both down to your bottom halves of your deck, and even though he has 2 Bahamuts, Control Blood's not exactly a class against which Bahamut is a very guaranteed threat. 3,
well, especially now. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now you can afford to throw them around a little bit. You don't even need to at this point. Honestly, with 3 Emeraldas and a Righteous Devil with 2 Evolution Orbs left, this is if I'm Hacterox, I'm saying I've won this game already. All I need to do is wait the next 13 turns. And where you guys might think it's Pillowverse, in my mind, it's a win against one of the toughest opponents in the game, especially when you think it's a shirt.
And even to add to that, I think something that's very amazing about that type of victory is you have to identify that your game plan is going to be lasting out every last card in an extremely high value deck like Dragon.
Right.
So he both had to develop the idea that he noticed he has had this advantage and has managed to get this far in the game with it, and is now committed towards it. To us, spectators, you can Pillowverse though.
Right. With the second Emerald, I would have felt that way. With the third one, I would have literally taken a sigh of relief and just been like, okay, there's not really a way I can lose this game. I just need to calm down and just answer everything that JaZe does, and then we'll be just fine.
Mm-hmm.
And don't accidentally misclick that Azazel or something like that.
Right. More or less. It's funny that Azazel is the main, or a huge supplement to the win conditions of Hacterox, and is now the card that he absolutely must not play. I think if there's any exceptions to the read we've made on how this game's going to go, it could just be these Star Phoenixes, because as long as JaZe has spells, it guarantees he has a board, too.
That's right.
Sinners be purged.
And yeah, I like this play. This basically says, all right, now you have to answer my value. Doesn't even Evo it. That's an interesting choice.
Mm-hmm.
That's an interesting choice. If that was the play, I might have actually elected to do something like play... No. Actually, I don't know. That's just a really interesting play. That's saying, you know what, you can deal with this, and I'm just throwing this card away versus at least clearing some of the board off. I don't know. I don't know about playing that card there.
To make. Yeah.
Yeah.
And not committing to using it to clear anything actually validates JaZe's board here. He gives him the chance to just simply answer it out of hand. And now these Star Phoenixes are something he has to deal with, but you can't really give up an Emeralda here, can you?
You can give up one, maybe. If I'm Hacterox, I've counted 1 Bahamut from JaZe. You need to make sure that you have an answer to every single Bahamut. So as long as you have 2 answers in hand, you're free to use the third one out of your hand.
Right.
That Righteous Devil play, though, it gave up a huge resource, especially when you've managed to hold on to both of your Evolution Orbs this long. I feel like giving up that resource has got to feel bad.
The only healing we see remaining in his hand even is just his Mask of Black Death.
Time for fun and games.
That's right, so he's got to be careful here.
Oh, he commits it already, which is really interesting. His Mask is really the only follow-up to Azazel that can guarantee that he manages to get away with reducing himself that low. Now Azazel would pop half of it for him.
And I think the Sahakul and Israfil play is perfect for this turn. It will pop the mask completely with all of the attacks, save the Evolution Orb, and keep Hacterox out of Vengeance.
I think if he goes for that line of play, that could just force Hacterox to use another Emeralda, which could just massively swing things towards JaZe's advantage.
I think JaZe might think that there's another Righteous Devil in hand from Hacterox, especially after how willing he was to throw away the last one, and might not opt to immediately play Bahamut. But I think he's running out of time, right? You've just got to start. Like, after you see the second Emeralda with 2 Bahamuts in hand, I think I might just go for it. I've already seen 2 Righteous Devils as well, but we're getting down to the bottom end of the deck, right? Like, you have access to most of your cards at this point.
I think he's going to go with what you said.
Sorrowful.
Just gets the value out of Sahakul here. This may be his last turn where he just plays reactively.
You're kidding.
It's very likely we actually see a Bahamut next turn, but it does kind of depend on when Hacterox draws here.
It could just be another Star Phoenix refill with a Fervor. That was a perfect draw. Now he doesn't have to commit anything.
Right, Revelation, and still, just holding on to this Belphegor means he still has the deck size advantage.
Yep.
Pure-Hearted Singer also would just completely offline carded his hand, however.
Fighting is so sorrowful.
I love this. Now it's just the big threats that are not Bahamuts. Draws the Zeus now, so now there's a lethal setup with pretty much any big follower that JaZe can stick. I don't like the Bahamut here.
Bahamut. That's really, really interesting, yeah. And Bahamut puts on a lot larger of a threat afterwards than Emeralda would. So you'd imagine he'd want to hold that until the turn where he might actually get to use Azazel with it. But using it as his first reaction to a threat could be a little tough.
I find a couple of these plays to actually be interesting. I think
Fun and games.
Hacterox, realistically, that's not a bad play because it does kind of force JaZe to have a Bahamut reaction unless he has another Scyther. But I think we know all 3 Scythers are gone. I haven't counted specifically that card. And then the follow-up Bahamut was forced, of course. But then drawing into the Blood Moon here actually gave Hacterox an endgame now that JaZe has to start worrying about.
Right. But I imagine Hacterox has been counting the Bahamuts as well and knows JaZe could respond with his last one down to only 7 cards left in his deck. I feel like the commitment of resources Hacterox has been doing actually shows a little bit of fear from him here.
Yeah.
Even just playing the
he's-
Righteous Devil
he doesn't
earlier.
wear. Yep. He's just afraid of the Star Phoenixes. Realistically, though, he's still in the same position. He still has an answer to a big threat. But now JaZe has access to more. He's got the Sahakul into a Zeus, into a replaying of the Zeus, and still has a Scyther and a Bahamut. So actually, before I thought they might have all been run out, but no, it's hiding under the play points. There is another Scyther there. So JaZe actually might be out-resourcing Hacterox simply because of that Righteous Devil play.
Right. Still 2 evolution points, and at a glance, you can't really see any better value or use of them upcoming from the situation that JaZe's now put him into. I think just getting the Breath of the Salamander out from JaZe made no difference in the use of that Righteous Devil. I think he just really didn't want to commit anything large to the Star Phoenixes, but as a result, allowed them to just grind him out.
Right? And Hacterox forced to play the Azazel now, just so that he can gain health. It's his only life gain option. Knows that there's a Zeus in hand. And he can actually clear board here if he wants. He might opt to clear the 4/4 and go face. I don't really see a lethal setup if he does that. So I don't think that's what he's going to do. Yeah, just playing the slow game.
Had he gone face,
Oh my
then-
goodness.
had he actually gone face there, I think he actually would have had a lethal setup with the last evolution point with the next Emeralda.
Oh, right,
assuming
he has an Evo
That
point
JaZe
left.
didn't have
Yeah,
healing.
that's right. So I would have opted for it. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, that would have only been 9 damage total. There's no Evo points left over. Zeus would have consumed all the play points. So, I mean, eking out that one little bit of damage could have won in this game, because the best option this turn again is JaZe's Zeus to just deal 5 damage to face, but of course JaZe has to be worried about, you know, another removal spell, another Emeralda that will just finish him off. So maybe he's like, maybe this is the Bahamut time. I've got to do it, and I've got to just suck down another Emeralda, and then I can just play Zeus's to beat that afterwards.
I think it actually might come back to the idea that Hacterox is actually playing a bit afraid here, because at a cursory glance, JaZe's list does not include anything like Forte or Genesis Dragon. The Zeus is all the damage he's going to be taking without an evolution point to back it up. So, not having that lethal... Oh, had he gone for that anyways, JaZe's best response would have been being forced to play a Draconic Fervor to get out of lethal range. Then he would also need another answer for Azazel, in which case he would also have put himself far behind in deck advantage.
Right. So I think, yeah, I think that's the one little turn that Hacterox... I think Hacterox is still going to win this game. It's more just I think he could have won it sooner had he played a little bit differently. But playing the way he's playing is not wrong. It's still going back to what I said a long time ago. I know I have the win, and I'm going to play like I have it. The end. However, actually, never mind. Scratch that for a second with the second Zeus.
It's either he finds heal now, or some source of healing. He only needs 2. There's a lot in the deck. At this point, it's really difficult to actually keep track of what's left, even just a single Diabolic Drain or otherwise. But to do that, he's going to have to draw. And that throws away...
Oh, no.
That would throw away his deck advantage. Doesn't want to do that.
And JaZe wins. So, yeah, so technically the way Hacterox playing scared, getting rid of the Righteous Devil, and also not evoing for face damage to set up lethal, he kind of just threw the game away.
How?
Wow.
Why is JaZe so good at this game? I don't understand.
It's because it's the fear factor, man. People are afraid of him, and they make plays like playing Righteous Devils for no benefit.
I feel like one of the things that set him apart in both of these matches against Control Blood was the way that JaZe played out his